And yeah, so, but I'd love to, and because I actually don't know this, tell me a little bit about your technical background, what you're building. I did a little snooping, so I know a little bit, but just, yeah, maybe start there.
Yeah, happy to do it. Um, I don't come from a coding background at all. Um, my background originally is in scholarship. So I'm a political science PhD. If you want to ask questions about the best way to organize your nuclear weapon arsenal for strategic deterrence, I'm your guy. Just let me know. Um, there was the extent to which I played with programming at all was with R for, statistical analysis. But there's always been a whole host of things that I wanted to build and hopefully put out there to see if they would be useful for other people too. But historically, the barriers to do that for somebody who up to that point has no coding background is not trivial at all. And
Yeah.
this is why I'm thrilled about Xano, because apart from just being what I think is a really elegant service, I think it has a social impact where there's a lot of bright folks out there that have, I think, probably some great technical innovations that if they brought it to market, we'd all be better off. But they never get there because there's just so much that they have to learn or people they need to co-found with. And you are one of these, I think, entrants in the space that will be breaking those barriers. And so I see a lot of downstream, I see you as a catalyst for technical innovation, and I'm just excited to get involved here.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. So poli-sci PhD, that's very impressive. How did you then come to this world of saying, okay, well, I do want to use one of these tools like Xano to build something? Has this been an idea that has been like stewing in your mind for a while? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, my career was not as satisfying as I wanted, in part because I wasn't expecting dourness among a lot of the folks I worked with, and there was always several projects, technical projects, app projects that I wanted to make, and just try digging around tutorials to do that. What one project is a quasi social platform that functions as a respect engine for the web. Currently, it's called Oath, and it's a way where people within any kind of bounded community on there can make commitments, keep them, and honor others along the way. Currently, a project that I am working on for a charter school, where I'm fortunate to get to be a product manager for this, is an app that ties all of the kind of resources, learning materials, Zoom sessions, everything that our students want and desire, all into one integrated space, which has been uh, something we've really needed to do in uh, in part because of the digital literacy gaps of the populations that we currently serve. Counterintuitively, having an app that integrates it all, if done right, can probably ease a lot of those gaps for them.
Awesome. Um, so now that we have a little bit of background on who you are and what your motivations are, both very cool projects, by the way. And I guess just a little bit more clarification there. Are both of these apps like Oath and the Charter School Project, are you doing them concurrently?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Um,
I'm getting my salary depends on one, and my passion depends on the other.
Got it. As with so many of us in this world, that's just how it goes. But hopefully, we can do more passion than the necessary income one. So I get it. So yeah, I think this is really about trying to answer whatever questions that you have. We've had a couple people pop in and out of the room, so but none have stayed. So really, let's start with whatever you want and whatever's helpful to you, and then if I feel the need to go backwards and explain a little baseline, I will.
Great. Perhaps we could start with just a couple conceptual components that I think I need to get a better grip on,
Yeah.
and we can talk about them through the lens of Xano. Um, there's a couple things I'm truly trying to make sure I know when I'm operating in Xano and also in the front end builder that I'm doing. Um, I want to understand the anatomy of an API call and also the response payload. Um, I understand that there are these things we call parameters. They may include authentication tokens. Um, I I don't know if I have a good systematic understanding of what those need to have, what they don't, and when Xano may yell at me if I'm adding too many inputs or not enough. Perhaps there I
He's
am.
back.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you just froze for a second. But I think I got the gist of the question. So just at a very high level, and I'll start maybe more basic than you'd like, but maybe then I'll go into more detail. APIs are really the glue of the internet. They're kind of what connects everything together. And in the simplest form, and something you may have heard explained in the video before, and something that Michael uses actually quite a bit, you can think about an API like a messenger. And that messenger basically goes to retrieve files from your filing cabinet or your database, and it passes it to your front end. Or it does some things with that data, and then it gives it to your front end. So really, that is the role, the central role of what an API is. Now, when we think about the anatomy of an API, we can really conceptualize it like the messenger. Sometimes you can basically just say, hey, messenger, just go get me all of the files from this one particular folder, like get me all the users or all the people that are in this restaurant right now. So the people, they would go, they'd maybe count, they'd return back all of that information. But when you start to think about how you can add a little bit more filtering or functionality to an API endpoint, that's when you start thinking about those inputs. So taking a step back, the way we think about it at Xano is there are three parts to an API endpoint. Part one are inputs, or what people call query parameters. That's what instructions the messenger might need to know in order to perform their operation properly. The second piece is the function, or the function stack, and that is a stack of operations that happen in a linear fashion when the messenger takes those inputs. And then finally, the response, which is like a receipt, like what is the messenger actually bringing back to you? So you can make that anatomy as simple or as complex as you want. When we talk about CRUD operations, we're talking about create, read, update, and delete. Those are the simplest forms of operations. That API is literally just going to the database, fetching the data, and returning that payload of everything back to you. Now, the nuance really comes in where you want a little bit more. So for example, the simplest form of a query parameter is like, I want you to look up a user by ID. Let's say you're user number 9. I want fetch me all the information for user number 9. It's gonna give me back Bobby Valentine, right? So that's the simplest query parameter. But you could also be like, well, show me all users that are nearby. So if I'm taking, for example, a geolocation from where I am, like I'm in Lake Arrowhead, it would show me all of the users within a 25, 50-mile radius, which then means you have to tell me how much radius you want me to look. So really, if you break it down to if you were asking someone to do you a favor, like an assistant, a messenger, what information would they need in a very logical fashion in order to do that operation? So that's kind of speaking at it at a high level. Does that help to clarify your understanding a little bit?
Yeah, very much. I like how the use of metaphor is. It makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe that's a good place to ask about the anatomy then of the endpoint. So I see these endpoints. They are, they seem to be URIs, URLs, and when I'm in Xano, I realize that I don't have a clear understanding about a base API versus these API endpoints that are method specific. I don't have a clear idea about for whatever front end solution I'm using, which is a no code right now.
Yeah.
When do I throw in the base API? What does that open up for me in the Xano database? And when instead would I grab like a very specific method API?
Yeah. Yeah. So the base URL really is the root. It's like the primary address that accesses all of the different operations. So by default, when you start a Xano project, we create all of the CRUD operations for you, and we create it in what's called an API group, right? So you'll notice that in Xano, there's like this public group, and that each group has its own base API URL. So all that is like, where's the location of all of these commands? So the messenger might know one command, they may know 20 commands. That API base URL basically opens up the door to how many commands they want to use. The endpoint itself is the command that the messenger knows. So for example, if I want to query your application, let's call it Oath, and I want to get the number of customers there, I would first access the base URL, which basically tells me these are all the public endpoints that the Oath API knows. And then I want to access the get customers or get users endpoint, which is then going to go fetch all of the users from that database. So that's kind of how you separate it out. Really, those endpoints are basically appended to the base URL. The base URL is the first part, and then each endpoint is appended thereafter.
Awesome. Okay. And if a user has access to the base URL, that means that they have access to all the other endpoints that are a part of that directory.
So the answer to that is yes and no. So if they went, for example, to your base endpoint within Xano, right now, everything is exposed. You see all of the different endpoints, and you can access all of the different endpoints. However, you can choose to lock down certain endpoints. So as you, for example, start to build your app, you may not want everyone to be able to access every command or hit every command. And this is where that authentication and the tokens come in. The way that that is handled is for each, let's just use that get users example from Oath. If I wanted to get all your customers, you don't want me just going in there and randomly accessing your customers, right? So in this case, you basically want the messenger to say, wait, who are you? Are you a random person off the street? Or are you Bobby Valentine, who's the only person that could have access to this? So that's where basically I have to pass that messenger an authentication token that tells them who the person is that's trying to access the data and how long they have access to that data for. So then once you pass that, that token to the API endpoint, it says, okay, cool, you're all cleared. Now we're gonna go ahead and run it. And you can actually tell the API, you can set up things in your function stack to say, if it's not Bobby, if it's Prakash, you can say a message like, sorry, you're not authorized to view this information. And this is really any login system throughout the internet. This is how it works. The user logs in. Once that login gets authenticated with the database, the API sends a token that you can then use, that token, that special key, to unlock any one of the endpoints that's locked. But you have to have that token in order to do so.
That's helpful. So two extreme versions, different sides of the poles on this is that in theory, you could have a set of APIs pointing to your database that are all public. They're just, if anyone just knows that URL, they can land there and see the information that's exposed. The other pole is that every single endpoint could be locked down where you can only access that if you are authenticated.
That's right. And just to be clear, I think best practice, people would say, always lock down everything, always. We made actually a very explicit decision to not deal with authentication out of the box, because what we've found and what we've seen in other services is there's a big hurdle to learning about authentication on top of learning about your APIs and how to get data. A lot of people just want to see, can I send data to a front end and can that front end receive the data? And in the beginning, it's so low stakes, like, yeah, okay, maybe you have like a user that's displayed, that's not really going to do anything. But as you start to grow your app and that app starts to become, the need for that security becomes more apparent, you're going to start asking those questions. And then we try to make it easy for you to lock down those endpoints.
Great. That's all the questions I have about this kind of broad conceptual piece. Is there, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add for anybody else listening or involved before I start asking about kind of specific Xano and other, as it relates to other services.
Yeah, I would just say that, again, the API is the glue that kind of connects everything together. One other thing that I'll say is, You'll notice with other services, they kind of use different metaphors like workflows and automation and things and scenarios and things of that nature. We have kind of made, and I'm not sure whether this is right or not, but we've made this explicit decision to maintain the language that the rest of the internet uses, because we know that inevitably you're going to be working with third-party APIs. We're building up a marketplace to where we try to make that easier for you. But for example, for people, and Bobby, I don't know if you've ever used Zapier before. If you're unable, if the app doesn't exist for what you want, that means you're going to have to go do it and build it yourself. And if you don't understand the concept of an API, how to pull in data from that third-party endpoint, how to authenticate with it, then that means that you're going to just hit a wall when you're trying to implement your application, which is why I think it's important for us to let's try to explain this nomenclature, but make it accessible in such a way to where people can pick it up and start, like you alluded to earlier, really democratizing the ability to build these nuanced applications. So that's the only thing that I'll say. That API, even though there's one that belongs to your application, every application has an API and they choose what to expose to you. So for example, if you wanted to use the Google Maps API, you wanted to see, for example, things that were around you, you have two options. You could build a database of like local merchants and restaurants around your area, which is not your expertise, so I don't know why you would ever do that. Or you could just plug into a third-party API like Google Maps or Yelp or something like that to pull that data in. And so you're basically doing the handshake with those other services. And one day your service like Oath or the charter school one will have a public API for other people to use. So everyone helps each other through these APIs. And that's kind of why I think it's important that people understand the concept.
Awesome. So I'll shift gears a little bit. There is a debate, a question when using these front-end no-code solutions. A lot of them have their own kind of internal, what they'll call internal collections. And unsurprisingly, the databases in those products are quite well married to what you want them to do, and and I see Xano as this incredibly powerful way to just do everything backend. But it makes me ask the question: at which point should a user say, you know what, an internal collection is not going to suffice for me? I am glad that these services have it, but I need to go to something that's just a much more robust system. What, in your view, what demarks staying with like, yeah, this is kind of simple internal versus going to Xano?
Yeah, so I always like to say, and by the way, Vic, hello. Vic, one of my good friends just joined Clubhouse, and he is the only person in there. Say hi to Vic. Hold on, I'm gonna just invite him as a speaker. This is good. This is a good first. Hey Vic, go ahead and say hello.
Hey Prakash, yeah, I'm listening. I'm bullish on this no code space, and I'm bullish on you personally. So I'm happy to hang out.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. So the way that I think about using a no code collection versus like something more robust like Xano, there's two ways that I think about it. If you're building an application that's simple, like you just are basically, for example, listing data, you're not doing anything else, and you're reading or you're writing or you're posting to it. That's really when you would want to use the internal collection. It's always better to have something in one system so it can be as fast as possible. The reason why people typically start to graduate into something like a Xano is because they want to do more complex business operations. So for example, when you want to take that list and double sort it, or basically take that list and do some calculations. And I'll just take Airbnb, for example. For like, let's say if you just wanted to list available locations, that's no problem. Use the internal collection. But if you wanted to list those collections, find nearby activities around it, also check the weather. And then when someone is booking based on the weather and the activity preferences that they have, you can see the business operations and the complexity are growing and growing and growing. So when you have all of that complexity, you need a system like Xano that's built to handle that complexity. And that's where these other no code tools on the front end they do a really good job of just displaying the data, but they kind of fall down when it comes to the business complexity. So they're more than happy to offload that complexity to something like us. That's why we're talking to the Adalo team or the DraftBit team or the AppGyver team, because they're just like, hey, look, we do what we do really well. You do what you do really well. And it's a great complementary relationship to kind of have. David, I just wanted to say hello. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll just keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned some front ends or some no code solutions that have a front end. When I was first on this, getting on this journey of no code, there is this question of like, oh my God, which one should I start with? And of course, a lot of people have a different, various points of view about that. When it comes to Xano, what is a good kind of roadmap about selecting what's going to be a relatively good fit to do to manage your front end stuff with Xano?
Yeah, so this comes into selecting the kind of front end that you want. And just to be clear, there's a couple, when we talk about front end, this is the thing that's going to interface with the APIs that we talked about, in so much detail before. So, the front end traditionally has been built in a programming language, right? A lot of what has been popular over the past couple of years has been like JavaScript frameworks, like you've probably heard of like React, right? Or Node or Angular. Those are basically frameworks that were used to just help engineers get started faster. And now over the past, let's say, couple of years, there's the advent of these no-code platforms, right? That allow you to build front ends, comprehensive front ends, and connect it to a front end. I think that when you are evaluating what front end you want to use, the first question you want to ask yourself is, do you want to use that coding JavaScript-based framework that gives you the ultimate flexibility, but it also comes with a ultimate complexity depending on your level, your technical expertise? Or do you want to use a no-code one? So for your situation, Bobby, it sounds like you want to use a no-code one, which is 100% okay. So then it really comes down to, okay, if you want to use a no-code front end, what type of flexibility do you want to offer your users? Is it just like, as I mentioned before, is it just listing data? Like, and you have to almost couple that with how fast do you want to get it out the door to start testing with your users? There's a lot of different types of tools. So I'll just talk about Adalo, for example. Adalo does a really good job at allowing you to get something out the door, connect it with either their internal or external collections, and then get it to market. But as of right now, and I know this is something they're working on, when it comes to those nuances on the front end or all of the different things that a user might want to do by way of UI interaction, they may not have everything available to you. So if that's important to you, then you might want to start with something that allows you a little bit more fidelity, like that AppGyver or the DraftBit. If you're doing a mobile application, if you're doing a web application, then again, you have Webflow, you've got Bubble, you've got so many different players in the space. So ultimately, what I always like to say is you have to go with the tool that is going to feel the most comfortable for you, because at the end of the day, you're building a business, right? You want to get something out the door quickly. So these frameworks it's one part like, how can I validate my business in the tool I'm most comfortable with? And then the other part is, how can I build it to such a level where I'm not constrained after I get it out the door?
Yeah, excellent. When let's say we're using a no code, or we're actually using a framework or something. And we're getting a problem with it not reading what we want it to read from Xano.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good way for us to figure out whether it's a user error or if there's something amiss with the connection? I'll give you a quick example. Recently, Adalo released its external users beta, and their betas for a reason, right? One of the issues that I came across with early on was that it was when a user would log in, it would bring in the information that was only directly passed, but it wouldn't reveal other variables for that user. And I thought, oh, okay, what am I doing wrong? And for the longest time, I couldn't tell whether it was me or whether it was something about the relationship between Xano and this no-code front end I was using. Do you have a recommendation about some kind of practice where we can figure that out, whether it's a user error or it's a a married service error?
Yeah, that's a really great question that I've got to tell you right off the bat, I don't have an amazing answer for, because a lot of this comes just with time and with practice. But here is how I would approach the issue. You know, when it comes to, you always want to make sure that data is right. Before anything else, is the data that you are pushing to from the back end being sent to the front end? I always start there. And so when you're trying to figure that out, whether you're using Xano or any other tool, you want to use that internal run and debug tool to make sure the data is being passed properly. So when you're talking about Adalo collections, for example, I think there are two components that you immediately want to pass. You want to make sure that the authentication token is being passed. That basically says, hey, I'm Xano, I have permission to access Adalo. And then the second thing is the user ID. Who is the person, right, that just logged in? And even more than that, I think you had wanted the name and maybe where their location is. Are you able to pass that from Xano? If you're able to pass all of those things, you know the data is right. You know that it is being sent to the front end right. So then you kind of start to debug on the front end. Okay, well, if I know for a fact, and Xano is telling me I'm getting all of this information, what am I able to display in Adalo, for example? And I think that it's through that dance, that back and forth, you're able to kind of debug and see where the problem is. We are working on ways to help users debug a little bit better. But when you're using, this connection between the back end and the front end, it's never an easy, oh yeah, that's a problem. No problem. Like, I'll just go ahead and fix that. It's something that I think like building an application is so nuanced that there's all these nuanced errors that you'll get. So always make sure the data is right to start and then see why it's not displaying on the front end. That's probably the best way that I would approach it. By the way, David or Vijay, nice to see you. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll tap you in. Did that answer your question? Kind of, maybe?
Yeah, there's a small addendum question that makes me think back about the anatomy of an API call. With Xano, or maybe with any backend, but with Xano, if we're passing, let's say we pass more query parameters in the request than what Xano is expecting as an input, will it poo-poo that, or does it just go through and just throw away any kind of like extra parameters that it's not expecting to receive?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You actually can specify whether something is required or when something is not required. And so with Xano, by default, when you are setting your inputs, it's going to make the assumption that you want those inputs. But you can go in there and say like, oh, I don't necessarily need this one. Like, so for example, if I'm pulling in all the user information and I want to look it up by ID, but I could also look it up by name, but that's not a requirement. I could specify that from within Xano. So just speaking more broadly, within the API, there are required parameters and then optional parameters. And so you can make the decision on how you want your API request done.
Awesome. My last question, and then if anyone else has any, I'd love to hear. I'm just still trying to soak as much of this up as possible.
Yeah, sure.
There's some more in a couple months. There's some more advanced operations that I want to do on the back end, some more advanced business logic, and so far it looks like Xano is best outfitted to do these kind of things. But perhaps you can walk me through how this kind of looks as a Xano operation and set of functions and how it deals with it. Something I want to do is imagine like an app, a social app that has for every user, it has an authority score, and this authority score is reflecting a series of relationships between the users that may be akin to like a page rank or an eigenvector centrality measure, something that is totally relative among the entire user base. if I wanted to calculate that, maybe I have the system do it on a daily basis and renew. I'm not sure. How could you walk me through how that actually looks when that's worked on the back end, say in Xano, and how that that kind of payload could be delivered to any user who's using the app?
Okay. So the way that I always like to approach these things is I always say, if you're able to describe it in plain English, you're able to do it within Xano. So what I'm going to have you do, and this is what I typically have people do when they are talking about more complex business operations, is pretend like you would have to have your mom, like she was controlling the mouse, and you would just have to tell her at a high level what was needed. So you just talked about this authority score, and you talked about, you know, page rank and how calculating the score. But let's just take the seed of that. Like, you're saying each user has a score associated with them. How is that score calculated? Walk us through that.
All right. So for example, and this is going to be, of course, super basic.
Don't worry about it.
Let's imagine, for example, that some users yeah, like certain kind of posts that another user is making. And that the value of that post, and so now I'm talking about posts, the value of that post depends not merely on the count of likes, let's call them likes, but that each like is weighted by the score of a given user. Now that score is derived by how many other users, not just how many other users with their weighted level of likes in the system liked their post. And so I kind of think about like using PageRank for the most popular web page is popular because other popular web pages link to it.
Yeah.
So that we can give a score on that page. We could do the same for users, and that could be a weight in the model for the value of any given like that user uses on subsequent posts.
Okay, and then that authority score so let me just make sure that I've understood this properly. So you basically have posts. We'll make it as simple as possible. You have posts. Those posts have a certain numerical value that are assigned to them. When someone likes that post, right, that basically like is worth the combination of that value that the post is worth with some sort of multiple on what their authority is, and their authority is dictated by how popular they are in the system. Is that correct?
Precisely.
Okay. And when we talk about popularity of a user, what is that? How is that dictated? So if you had to, let's do a simple math formula on, let's say it's Prakash and Bobby in the system. Is it that I liked more things, therefore I am more popular? Or is it that, tell me a little bit more about that, and then we can do this whole scenario.
Yeah. Okay. Let's imagine a model that has a universe of 3 users, and a user's authority is some relationship. It's some model between the number of days that person is on the system. Okay. It is the number of times they have done a certain activity. Let's imagine the app provides for them some activity to do. This is some other measurement of engagement. And there is some kind of proportion within which they're doing it of the total set. And plus, variable 3 is, say, the number of times that those posts from them have been liked by other users. So let's just use a simple, kind of 3 variable model for what would compute an authority score.
So the number of days they've been on, the number of times they've liked something, and the number of times that people have liked their things. Is that fair? Or is there another dimension?
Yeah, sure. And then that number of things that of other people like those things is also depending on that weight coming from the other user.
Okay, got it. So the way that I would start to set, and obviously there's some nuance here that I'm not going to get, but this is the way that I would set that up here within Xano. The first thing that you need to think about when you're designing any sort of system are like, what are the big objects? What are the big things within your system? And so when you think about that, these are really your database tables. So for this, you would have users, obviously this would be like people like you and myself, and let's just call it Michael within the system, that 3-user system. Then you would have your posts, and these are just the random, like, let's call them social posts. But then you would also have on the post, you would also have a like field, or just a like database table. And that would basically just calculate all of the, or contain all of the likes within the systems and all of the relationship that those likes have to those posts and other objects that you're going to introduce one day into your system. But the final thing, which is less obvious, is I would actually have like an authority table, right? So the authority table would then have relationships with likes. So like incoming likes, outgoing likes, the weight that would then be increased, and then number of days on the system. So when a user is created, you basically now start your business logic. That line item on the authority table gets linked. Prakash has day 0, has now started on March 1st, 2021. He has 0 likes that he's given out, 0 likes that he's received. So our authority score of 0. As soon as I do any action, I'm basically going to create a new API endpoint, or a command that the messenger knows, that in the background, like in my view, Prakash, I'm just liking a post, but the system, that messenger, is going to take that post and it's going to add it to the authority table. It's going to link it to my user, and it's going to increment the weight, right, of that. So that way I have this authority table that is the master authority, right? The central place where all of the authority is calculated. Now, you could do this on a per action basis. You could also do this as a what we call a cron job, a chronological, at a certain time period, you could have it run, like, for example, on a nightly basis, and it would just calculate this over and over. That is called background tasks within Xano. But yeah, that's basically how I would do it. So starting at the kind of the larger level of like, what are the different entities? So creating those entities, and even the authority itself is an entity. And you always want it kind of separated in this separate layer, because in the future, let's say, with 10 users, 10 authority scores, it's not a big deal. But once you start getting into like a Google problem, for example, like let's say there's like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rows, if you have it separated in another table, you can pipe that in to something like a big data processor, right? You can feed that and have them kind of have the big data or ML basically learnings from that data set, and it makes it a lot easier. So when you talk about, for example, big data and machine learning, you hear a lot about ETL, which is like you're engineering, you're transforming the data, and then you're learning from it. So that transformation layer is made much easier once you're able to separate it out completely into its own table. So that's how I would approach it. Now, this is the interesting thing about this backend building. There's so many ways to do it. Like, that's one way. Someone that might be listening to this might be like, that's a stupid way. There might be another way to do that. But I think that in terms of best practice, that's how I'd approach it.
That is awesome. Well, Prakash, that's all of this has been super enlightening. That's all the questions I had for you.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, Bobby. And I think, you interview like a part of the podcast host. It's crazy. I just thought you were just going to random fire ask questions, but you've really done so in a structured way. So I really appreciate it. Vic, I don't know if you're still around. Do you have any questions that you want to chime in on?
No, man, I'm just here to support. This was exciting.
Awesome.
More of these.
Very cool. Michael, anything from you?
Nothing from me.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think this is a great session. I mean, look, I definitely want this to be kind of this evergreen content that anyone can come and learn from. And I just, I'm so grateful, Bobby, to have you, or we're so grateful to have you as a customer. And we hope that, you continue to get value from Xano, and just know that we're here for you. If you need help, we always, you've probably seen, we're a super hands-on team. We want everyone to succeed. And so yeah, I think we really appreciate it. I did have one question for you. What other tools did you evaluate before finding Xano?
Other than internal collections of a few no-code complete solutions, things that were billed as that, well, I tried a few services for that. And when I started researching, hey, what is a robust, straightforward backend solution There was very little that came up. I actually discovered Xano, I think on YouTube of all places. So your YouTube content, this content is I think really driving some of us who are trying to figure out how to make everything work in this world. It's effective. So thank you, Michael, for that. I think it was one of your videos. Um, yeah, I didn't really encounter any kind of like, clear competitors or clear alternatives that weren't things that were just like enterprise level solutions
Right.
that I thought they would just kind of, probably build on their own. So anyway, it just seemed like the only thing that was the answer to everything I was looking for. It was the miracle in the distance.
That's I mean, that brings us so much joy to hear. Yeah, that brings us so much joy to hear. And we we are hearing this more and more, and we're trying to put out more and more content so to help people. So just by way of any asks that you might have from the team, obviously I'm sure you can imagine we have like a laundry list of things that people have been asking us for and on our roadmap. But for you, whether that be a feature, whether that be a piece of tutorial content, is there anything that you kind of have a burning desire to have us create?
No, not off the top of my head. The only questions that are going to be that I'll be grappling with for the next 4 or 5 weeks is this question we were talking about earlier, which is this a limitation of the front end service that I'm using, or is this me doing something wrong? And I'll always go and start with the Xano run and debugger, which is nice and elegant. I'm so grateful you guys have this out running out of the gate. But those are going to be, I think, my main issues for a while. So on the Xano front, all is good.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great, man. Well, just keep us posted, and we're always here and happy to help. And yeah, I think that's about it. But just I mean, this is orthogonal to all of the stuff that we're talking about today. Why do you have such a good setup? I mean, your microphone is, are you like a podcaster? Like what's going on here?
I am not a podcaster. I may in short time start one because there's been a demand from a small set of friends and acquaintances who would like to hear me ramble about honor cultures, which is I have a sociological background in honor cultures and like reputations for deterrence and all these kind of things that happen in a kind of social level. They'd like to hear me talk about it. So there may be a podcast coming. But in the meantime, I have been a teacher in the last year. It was my way of making ends meet. And once the pandemic struck and I realized that I was going to be in front of human beings most days of the week after week, month after month, I thought, okay, well, the tools that you interface with on a daily basis ought to be the things, in my view, that you should prioritize and spend a premium on. We spend a third of our lives on a good bed or on a bed. It might as well be a good one. If I'm going to spend hours a day, every day in front of in Zoom chats, might as well make it look good.
Hey, amen to that. I love that. I love that philosophy. And it's very much why I've started to invest in the equipment. My new lens is coming, so I'll look as crisp and as sharp as you pretty soon with the nice bokeh in the background. This will be a lot more blurred out. But yeah, I think that's great. And just
in fact, the camera and the speaker is microphone is basically the Italian suit in the 80s. Like, this is how we suit up right now. So might as well make it look good.
That's right. It's so funny because on a lot of calls that I'm on, they always like comment on my, even though this is just like, it could be better, but it's so much better than everyone else's that a lot of people always reference the fact and they appreciate the fact that we've suited up, as it were, right? Yeah. Very cool. Well, I guess the final thing I have is really just around community. We want to build a stronger community of people that are, might be at the same stage as you by way of company building or app building, just so everyone can help each other. We obviously want to be involved, but We want the community to help each other more and more. Do you have any ideas or things that worked well or things that you think that we could do better around that?
Yeah, I have one idea. There are a lot of common, I'd say packaged things that we may do from product to product. And it would be really nice, I suppose, if one of the people in the community, one of, a Xano user in a community solves for that in Xano. If there was some way we could just modularize it, and then like it's a simple kind of template that we could look at and be like, aha, that's the endpoint construction that they use. That's the function stack.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I'm just going to pick that and I'm going to like plug that in and make a few changes that would be relevant in my app, ecosystem. But I'm so glad that was there. That saved me hours of time.
Yeah. Stay tuned. Maybe something like that might come soon.
Awesome. Prakash, thank you so much for all of this.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. And like I said, just shoot us a note if you have any other questions, but this was super helpful. I'm glad we did this. And thanks for your willingness to be on Clubhouse as well and to have this recorded. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Sweet. Wonderful. Happy to be involved.
All right, Bobby.
Have a great one. I hope everyone has a great week.
All right. See ya.